Never in a game are you going to do the same exact thing twice in a row, right? You're going to be mixing it up. One time you go down, you might get a layup. Next time might be a three. Next time might be a floater. You don't have a chance to get in a rhythm and just keep shooting the same shot over and over again. So it's going to transfer more into actual games, which again is what we said is exactly what we're after. So today I want to talk about some of the most widely held basketball training myths and explain my reasoning for why I do not believe them and the scientific approach and the things that I have learned to disprove these myths. Now, most of you guys watching are still believe in these things and still do these things daily in your workout. So hopefully this video will help you guys change that, enhance your workouts so you guys can get better as players and you guys can be more effective as coaches. So the first myth that I think pretty much everyone believes is we need to start with the fundamentals. We need to start with the basics and we need to slowly work our way up. Now I want to ask you a question. First off, what even is a fundamental? A fundamental is a baseline principle or something that is done very often. You think about certain footwork in basketball, that is a fundamental because it happens often. And my main question is, if it's so fundamental, then won't you just pick it up naturally by playing? And I think that's how just about every NBA player, every player that you see at the highest level at this point, they didn't start by just doing the basics. They didn't work their way up and take baby steps to get to where they're at. Now, I think we should I think we should work backwards where we start and just throw players into the fire and let them figure it out. And then if they don't have things as they get older, okay, we can add things. Now, the problem with starting with the basics is we're limiting the players that are in front of us. First off, training the basics is the most boring thing anyways. If we're taking 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old players and we're starting them at the basics, their workouts are going to be so boring. At that age, all you want to do is play, and I believe that's all you really should be doing with them. Now, you can, behind the scenes, be manipulating things so that way they're training the basics without even really knowing they are or working on certain fundamentals, but I think we should just largely just let them play, and they're going to pick these things up anyways. If they're so fundamental, if they're happening so often in the game, they're going to just naturally learn them and they're going to pick up on them. Like I was saying, that's how every NBA player grew up. All they did was play pickup. You think Michael Jordan had an instructor who was saying, hey, all we're going to do is jabs today when he was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old? No, he was out playing against his brother, playing pickup and getting his beaten day in and day out. Same thing with Allen Iverson. Same thing with LeBron James. He didn't have someone saying, hey, we're just going to go between the legs up and down the court. No, he didn't do that. He played, and then maybe once he got a little older, he started to pick up on things and fine-tune his game a little bit more. Now, the other thing, like I was saying, I think we should work backwards is we can do more complicated things, and then if that doesn't work, we can regress this. So say you do have a 10-year-old kid, a 12-year-old kid, and you want to train them formally, I would say do the more complex things first, because oftentimes if we're starting with the basics, we have the belief that this player can't figure it out. They can't do the more complicated stuff. And oftentimes the more complicated stuff contains the fundamentals within it. So say you want to teach someone how to do a through cross or between the legs because it's so basic. You can do more complex things like put a defender in front of them, say, hey, you have this amount of distance to go by them, and by default, they're going to be training these fundamentals in these situations. So we can work backwards where we present the more difficult, the harder things first, and then work backwards if we need to. But one of the things you'll notice is training is not linear in the first place. Not every player is going to learn the exact same. So if we always start at ground zero and think we need to build up, we are thinking that every player is the same, they're all going to learn the same. You may be able to present something that's 7 steps ahead to one kid. He may be able to pick it up just like that, and you just skipped 6 steps. But if that other player can't, okay, we can work backwards. Maybe we start at step 3, that's where they can get it, and then we go from there. So if we're starting at the basics, I think we're slowing down every single player's development. We're also limiting the players and believing that they're not as capable as they truly are. Now, I like to tie this to language learning because pretty much every single person who's watching this video had to take a second language in school, and this is exactly how you guys are taught. Let's start with the basics, let's start with these words, and then let's try to tie them into the larger picture, which is the conversation, as you get older, right? But instead, if you guys just say, hey, let's just go to a country and start learning the language, you're not gonna start with the basics. You're just gonna hear it, you're gonna start to piece things together, and then boom, all of a sudden, now you can start to speak to people. But if you start with the basics, we need to learn the alphabet first, and then we need to learn the and like how to say all these different words, and then we start to build it up, you're not gonna be able to learn the language. Most of you guys watching took a second language and learned in this fashion, but you cannot speak it. But I would argue if you spent the same amount of time just listening, watching movies, or trying to converse with other people and trying to figure out, even though it's more difficult, I would argue a lot more of you guys would be able to speak a second language. So with all these things in mind, my belief is that we should start with the more difficult stuff first, or give a player a chance to do the more difficult stuff and then revert back. I would rather work backwards than work forwards because I believe that we're going to be able to help players learn better and learn a lot faster than if we just try to start with the basics and take baby steps up. So the second myth is to get better at something, we just need to do the same thing over and over again. This is the classic block versus variable practice debate. If I want to get better at something, I just need to do it over and over again. If I want to get better at catch and shoots, I'm just going to shoot from the same spot. I'm going to get 50, 100 reps in a row. That's how I'm going to get better. I want to get better at a move, just rep out the same exact move on air. A million times, you'll eventually get better. Is that true to a degree? Yes, you'll eventually get better just by default because you've done it so many times. Is that the best way to do it? Absolutely not. And right now, block practice is the standard for a couple different reasons. Number one, it's just the easiest to replicate. Okay, I want to get better at this, so I'm just going to do it, right? I don't have to think about it. I don't have to put much mental effort into figuring out how to structure the practice. Also, I think most coaches just do it because they're lazy. I want to get him better at this, so I'm just going to do that. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to figure out, okay, how am I going to mix this up a little bit? How am I going to present challenge? How am I going to add? I don't have to think, just do this, right? It's very easy. And I think because of that, it's kind of become the standard. But when we look at any study, variable practice is going to win in terms of transfer and actually getting someone better in terms of the actual skill. So just to clarify, block practice is where we're doing the same thing over and over again without any interruption. We're shooting the same catch and shoot shot. It's the same skill, same spot, same way. Where variable practice is we might get that catch and shoot. Next one, we might get a one dribble side step or we might get into a floater. We're going to differ in terms of the skills that we're doing every single rep. Now, the other reason I think block practice is the standard is because we see this initial immediate improvement. I want to do this. I want to get better at that. I just do it a lot of times. I feel like I get better across the session, right? If I start shooting catch and shoot shots from the wing, maybe first 10, I go 7 out of 10. Next one, I go 8 out of 10. Next one, I go 9 out of 10. You feel like you improved, but really you just improved across the session because you did it so many times. You were able to get a feel for it. You were able to get in a groove, but you didn't actually get better at the skill. You just got better at the task within that workout. Now it's not going to transfer to the games. When we look at any block versus variable study, what we see is we see immediate improvement in terms of block practice. Variable practice is slower, but when we look at transfer, which is, in my opinion, the only thing that matters, just because you can shoot better in the gym by yourself doesn't mean you got better. It's all about what happens when you go to the actual game. So we see immediate improvement with block practice, slower improvement over the first, say, 4 to 6 weeks with variable practice. But when we look at the transfer, variable practice is up here, block is up here. So if we're going to get better, and that's our goal, and we're trying to get better in games, the only thing that should matter is transfer. But I think a lot of people go over, okay, I feel better in workouts. I feel like I'm getting better during the workout, so that must be what's working. I'm going to keep doing that. Whereas this variable practice, you don't feel like you're getting as better during the workout. It doesn't feel as good because you're being challenged. But again, the whole goal is to get better in games. We look at all these block versus variable practice studies. Variable practice is going to win in terms of transfer, which in my opinion is the only reason why. Now let's actually talk about why that is and the implications for you guys so you guys can apply this to your workouts. Now the reason that variable practice is going to win in terms of transfer is because if we want to get better at an actual skill, which includes both the technique and the decision-making components of a game, is we need 3 things that are present. We need challenge, we need to be challenging the skill, it needs to be difficult, we need to be messing up. And if we're doing the same thing over and over again, it's very easy to correct yourself and then just keep doing the same thing. One of the great analogies for this is, okay, I give you a math problem, what's 7 times 7, and you don't get it the first time, but I say, what's 7 times 7 again, you get it the second time. I ask you again, you don't have to think, you just keep repeating the same thing, right? So there's no challenge in that. Versus if I was like, what's 7 times 7, you don't get it, I say, what's 15 times 15, now you have to think about that, right? So you're constantly thinking and you're constantly challenging your knowledge, which is going to build the skill. The second thing is cognitive effort. Again, I give you the same analogy, 7 times 7, 7 times 7. The more I ask you, you don't have to think. It's the same problem over and over again. There's very little cognitive effort because you can get in a groove, right? We've all done it where we're just shooting spot-up shots and you kind of just get in a zone, you zone out, you're not really thinking. Now, it feels good from a flow standpoint because you're just doing the same thing, you got a rhythm, but that's not where we get better. We don't get better by less cognitive effort. We get better the more focus and intent and thought that we can put into the task, the better we're going to get at it. So variable practice will help you guys by default put more cognitive effort and more focus into the task because you're constantly challenging yourself, you're constantly mixing it up, and you need to refocus on what you're doing. The third thing is that our practice needs to represent the game from both a psychological and a physical standpoint. Never in a game are you going to do the same exact thing twice in a row. Right, you're going to be mixing it up. One time you go down, you might get a layup. Next time might be a 3. Next time might be a floater. You don't have a chance to get in a rhythm and just keep shooting the same shot over and over again. Now, it's also from a psychological standpoint a little bit more challenging. You can add a little bit more pressure through this variability, so it's going to transfer more into actual games, which again is what we said is exactly what we're after. So when I say that we need to challenge the skill, I don't mean from a physical standpoint of just being out of breath, which is I think what most people do. Hey, I want to do block practice. I'm just going to rep it till my arms get really tired and my lungs get really tired and I feel like I'm challenging myself, but all you're challenging is your cardiovascular. You're not challenging the actual skill itself. One of my favorite ways to kind of think of this is we're constantly trying to break the skill so that you can't do it. This is something that I do with a lot of my pro guys, higher level guys, is I'm just constantly upping the variability to the point that they can't get it, right? So for example, say we're trying to work on a certain finish at the rim, right? We're trying to go left, right, at the rim, extend out. If I give it to them once, they can do it. If I have to do it again, they can do it. Third time, they can do it. So I need to mix it up where we're going, hey, we're going left, right finish, then we're spacing out corner 3, then we're going floater. Now you need to come back into that finish. Now, because they're thinking about all the different things, they can't think about that first rep, oh, I should have done this. So immediately as they're getting into it, they need to think, they need to refocus, and they're oftentimes mess up. So I'm challenging that technical skill by adding that variability. Now, what this does is, like we were saying in the beginning, is presenting challenge. What does challenge do? Challenge strengthens something that we call myelin, which wraps around a neuron, which essentially helps to transmit that skill so you guys can actually execute it. One way you can think about it is, okay, say this is a skill, right? Now you do the 1-2 finish, you mess it up. Every time that you do it, every time that you relearn it, every time that you execute through challenge, you're strengthening it, right? So the stronger it is, the easier you're going to be able to execute that skill. I don't know if that even makes sense to you guys in the way that I just explained it, but through challenge, you strengthen the skill. The more that you challenge it, the more that you relearn it, because that's one of the ways that we learn is by forgetting and relearning. That's challenge, it's strengthening the skill. The more you do that, the more you're going to strengthen the skill. You cannot do that through block practice because you are not forgetting to relearn because you're doing the same exact thing over and over again. You're not giving time for the person to essentially forget and then relearn. So with everything that I just said, you don't necessarily need to understand it. You just need to understand that there is a reason for the science working, and this is the reason why you should be doing variable practice over block practice. Now, simple way to do this. If you guys are in your workouts, you want to do more variable practice, I don't know what to do. Just don't do the same exact thing over and over again. I want to work on a 2-foot finish. That's fine. Just don't do a 2-foot finish twice in a row. Do a 2-foot finish, space out 3. 2-foot finish, floater. Just mix it up, add a little bit of variability, and all you got to do is just don't do the same thing twice in a row. Very simple way to add this to your workouts, to add challenge to any skill that you guys are trying to improve. So myth number 3 is that we should learn moves or learn skills before putting it into live play. This kind of ties into my first point of we need to learn the basics, we got to get the fundamentals, and then we're progressively going to add things into live play. And I think this is bullshit. I think this is backwards, right? We're essentially ripping the whole skill apart when we're learning backwards. We're saying, hey, everything in a game needs to be unconscious, it needs to be instincts, we need to just be able to do it. But hey, let's take that skill, let's isolate it, let's learn it, let's make it conscious, then let's try to put it into live play, then let's try to add the decision, then let's try to make it unconscious when we should just do it the other way. The other thing is not every single player is going to learn or lean into certain affordances or moves the exact same. So you're teaching player A, player B, player C the same exact move for the same exact situation, when in reality player B might not be fit for that move. So I think we should do it completely the other way that it typically is taught, and I'm going to explain exactly why. Number one is players are going to learn a lot better implicitly, which is just learning through doing, kind of presenting problems and allowing them to kind of figure it out for themselves, versus the way that most people do it, which is explicitly. We're teaching them exactly what to do, making it very conscious, and then trying to tie it back into live play. So implicit learning has shown to be much more effective, specifically in the clutch, in late game situations, and under pressure. Now the reason for this is when we learn implicitly, we have nothing conscious to fall back under. When people tend to choke in late game situations, this is because they're consciously thinking about what they're doing. When we learn things explicitly from a coach telling us exactly what we need to do, we have all of those conscious thoughts to fall back into, right? Think about you've been taught exactly what to do at the free throw line, bend your hips to this degree, do this with your elbow, do this with your wrist. When we step to the free throw line in a clutch situation, we start to think back to all of these cues. And the more we're consciously thinking about these cues, the more we mess up our automatic movement patterns. So when we learn things implicitly, we don't have these cues to fall back onto, and our movement can just be a lot more automatic, which is exactly what the best players do. They're not thinking, they're just doing. So to me, instead of teaching things where we're going to go teach it consciously, then try to add it to live situations, then try to get the decision, then try to make it unconscious, we're going to go the exact opposite. I'm going to present a solution. I'm going to allow maybe it's one player or multiple players to fall into that situation, try to just figure it out, right? I'm just presenting a problem. I'm going to see how they're going to solve that problem. Now, based on how they do that, based on the individual, I can then revert it back a little bit and then add some constraints where maybe, okay, I want them to do this. I'm not going to tell them, but I want them to lean into this. Okay, they don't do it. Now I can reverse it even more. I'm going to be a little bit more conscious in what I'm telling them, and they're going to be a little more conscious in terms of learning it. because that's what fits them and their certain play style. Again, as I was saying in the beginning, not every single player is the exact same. If we're teaching every player to do the exact same thing in the exact same situation, it might not fit their play style. So I'm going to do it in this manner because I'm allowing that individuality. I'm allowing players to read affordances differently, see how they react. Maybe a player can already do something that they need to do in a situation, and me adding moves is just going to fuck it up even more because now they're thinking, they're a little bit more conscious when they don't need to be. So I'm going to present these problems, I'm going to present these situations, see how they react, and then I'm going to teach or I'm going to add based on that. And I'm going to add constraints first, so again, they're not consciously thinking, allowing them to solve these problems on their own implicitly, so that way they learn without even really knowing that they're learning. If that doesn't work, okay, I'll be a little bit more explicit. They'll be a little bit more conscious with their learning, but I want to work backwards as opposed to work forwards. This is going to help transfer, this is going to help effectiveness in games, and it's also going to speed up the process and be a lot more effective. Now, the other key to this, like I was saying in the second point, is if we want our learning to be effective, it needs to be representative of the game from both a psychological and from a physical standpoint. Doing this where I'm putting them in these situations, adding constraints, allowing them to figure it out and learn implicitly, is going to be almost as game-like as we can get from a training perspective. So that transfer, that learning is going to be a lot more effective than just teaching these moves explicitly, hoping that they learn it and trying to build it up. We're also learning in the context of the game, which to players and to the actual learning process is going to be much more effective. When you take things out of context of the game, they don't really have a reason to learn it, right? You're just going to add this move. Why? When am I going to add it? Then you need to teach them, okay, in this situation, you're going to do this. Why don't you just put them in a situation, they f it up 10 times, and then you can show them the move. Now they have context for what they're doing. They have more reason to learn it. They have more motivation to learn it, and they already understand why, as opposed to having to sit there and listen to you for 5 minutes, explain what it is and why they're doing it and when they're going to do it. So basically everything that you've seen on social media, on most of the YouTube videos, and how you should train, it's essentially the opposite. To me, everyone works forwards, where I would much rather work backwards. It's going to speed up the process. You're trusting players that they're more capable than they actually are, which I think they are. Most trainers, coaches don't think players are very capable. You got to start with the basics. You got to work it up. You got to be boring. When in reality, it doesn't need to be boring. It doesn't need to suck. You can make training a lot more fun by adding variability, making it representative of the game, putting them in situations, allowing players to figure it out for themselves, learning implicitly. Overall, this is going to be a much more effective process if you want to get players results. If you guys are a player, you don't need to understand this 100% the way that I explained it. You just need to understand the reasons behind the things that I'm talking about and be able to apply the principles to the larger scale and to your training if you guys want to get better. So, long video. Hope you guys liked it. For any of the nerds that want more information, feel free to comment. I can give you guys some more resources to some of the studies, some of the books that explain this stuff. So hopefully it helped you guys. And if you're going to use any of these clips for your podcast, please be sure to shout me out and to give me credit for who you're talking about. That said, see ya.